we were trying to remember, but right before we started, why we were going to do this one, and neither one of us remembers. It was just, you had just watched them recently, and we were kind of talking about them. We were trying to figure out what our next one was going to be, and we usually do franchises. Mm-hmm. So it was like, why not this? Because I did already talk about the first movie a while back. I did it as a versus with Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Mm-hmm. But, as usual, I have no recollection of what I said, so blank slate. And then I guess we're just going to go through, because the first one, regardless of how people feel about it, because some people still think it's great, some people, when it first came out, thought it was no better than the direct-to-video sequels that it spawned. Which, when you go back and look at it, you can kind of see. Like, you can kind of see how it was, like, the start of endless imitations, despite the fact that this is a genre that had long since existed before this came along. Mm-hmm. So
I feel like this was kind of late in the game, honestly.
Yeah, so it's like it reinvigorated it somehow. Because I remember when I guess we're just going to kind of go, I don't know if we're going to jump around or talk about movie to movie, but we'll see where we end up. Mm-hmm. But the thing I remember about it was, because we talked about how is it different from the like 80s variations of the raunchy teen comedy, or even late 70s if you want to go back to Animal House. And it's like, I remember, because this was like my era when, in 99, I would have been 8 or 9. So I kept hearing about this movie, and just how, like, I never heard the details of it. Like, even the title, I never learned the meaning of till I saw the movie, and exactly what that joke was. And even then, a lot of stuff went past me, obviously. But the thing about it was that the way it was being described and the way it was being built up, I'm hearing this at 8 or 9 years old. I pretty much go into American Pie assuming it's basically a mainstream porn. Is how it had been built up. And it's interesting when you go back and watch it how... I mean, there's some dirty shit. Even by today's standards, there's some dirty shit. But it's also extremely mild in many cases, too, in a way that it wasn't back then.
It's relatively tame.
The
scene,
what
you would think.
Yeah, the scene that really makes me think, this is the opening, where it's him and he's trying to watch the porn through the, fuzziness and all that. And, funny thing, if you read up on it, the voice that you hear in the porn, the guy that says, like, spank my hairy ass and stuff like that, that's Eddie K. Thomas.
Oh, that's funny.
But, the thing about that is that his parents come in and he's got the sock and everything, and they're like, oh my god, and that's it. That's all it was. Like, at the time, it seemed like this big opening with this big payoff and this big raunchy joke.
We don't even see a dick that I remember.
Yeah, and you know what else I think kind of ruined that somewhat and made it seem mild? Was the Not Another Teen Movie take on it. Where they kept building on it, where it was like her birthday and then her grandparents were there and all that. It's like, I think I saw Not Another Teen Movie so many times, I kept forgetting that the American Pie opening was not that, didn't go that far. So it always surprised me when I look back on that and it's like, oh yeah, we're just kind of starting abruptly. But back then it would have been like raunchy as hell.
This is off topic, but what a journey that Chris Evans has had since Not Another Teen Movie.
So, yeah, you can't really say that about much of anybody else in that cast. At least to that extent, anyway. And you can kind of, I guess to go on that also, it's interesting to see where the cast of this movie ended up, because none of them are in obscurity, but none of them are, like, huge anymore either.
They're just kind of there.
Even Seann William Scott has kind of, like, I mean, Lethal Weapon just got canceled, so it's like, he's still in there, but none, I mean, not that we really expected, when you go into one of these movies, you expect that, the cast is gonna...
Honestly, the one that probably ended up the biggest out of all of them is probably Allison Hannigan.
Yeah.
Because she had How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah, because Biggs was only on Orange is the New Black for like a little bit, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, what's her name? She plays Jessica.
Natasha Lyonne.
She's on Orange is the New Black, too.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, but Biggs hangs around like the first season. Mina Suvari did some things later, but she's not as big as she was. Like, she had American Beauty.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious to me. Is that's the great thing about Mina Savari's character and that whole storyline about her being the band geek. Is that, and almost like the other see her as like undesirable. Is she's the total opposite in American Beauty. And both those movies came out the same year. They both start with American in their title, and they both have John Cho in them too. It's weird how much this movie connects to American Beauty.
John Cho may be one of the ones that ended up bigger coming out of this too, because he had the whole Harold and Kumar franchise, and
he just gave one of the best.
And Star Trek.
Yeah, he just had one of the best performances of last year in Searching.
Yeah.
He's like really going into like the indie scene as far as acting. Like he did an indie movie, Columbus, a couple of years ago that he really got a lot of acclaim for. So yeah, yes, okay. That determines it. I'm pretty sure John Cho is probably the most successful of the cast right now.
But I like John Cho.
Oh, yeah. And I love that even despite the popularity, because American Reunion was 3 years after the first Star Trek. Mm-hmm. And the whole arc that the MILF guys have is like probably my favorite thing in this whole franchise.
It is quite an interesting direction to take those two.
And the fact that he's one of the few characters that's actually in all of them. Because around the time Wedding came out, people started dropping off. Like Natasha Lyonne disappeared, Oz disappeared, Mena Suvari obviously disappeared, Tara Reid disappeared. So many people are not in Wedding.
And Wedding, with Wedding, it also shows.
Yeah. Well, you
hear that list of characters and you think, that's pretty expendable. You're keeping the core, but when they're not there, you notice.
Well, I noticed the thing you pointed out to me before I even revisited Wedding. I remember when Wedding came out, it was like just the absolute most hilarious thing ever. And I think it helped a lot that when we saw it, the night we saw it was the night it came out in the biggest auditorium in the theater. And that theater was packed and everybody was eating it up. Mm-hmm. So that was one of those cases where I still vividly remember seeing American Wedding for the first time. It was such a group experience.
That's how I saw Goldmember too, if you remember that.
Yeah, and then you look at it now, was that 2003? So that'd be 16 years ago. And things have changed. And the first thing I noticed was, I remember, obviously, I would have been about 13 when American Wedding came out, so I was the perfect audience for the character of Stifler.
Yeah.
And you were telling me that the thing that kind of drowns Wedding out is what essentially made it so successful in 2003, and that was the fact that it basically became the Stifler show. Because he was such a side character in the first movie, and he was still a side character in 2. Like, he was there more, and he got to kind of go bigger and more over the top, but it was still grounded with the characters we were really focused on, like Jim and what Kevin was going through, too.
Yeah. And Reunion, I thought when I first saw it was going to fall into that, too, but Reunion kind of...
They learned from it.
Ends up in the same place as 2 as far as Stifler's presence, I feel like.
Yeah, you can tell.
Somewhere between 2 and 3, closer to 2.
Yeah, he gets a lot to do, but they don't like make it pretty much his story the way they did in Wedding.
Yeah.
Because the thing I noticed in Wedding where that really kind of stood out was it's American Wedding. So the movie should be about Jim and Michelle. And it should be about their problems and all that. And they work from there.
I think when Stifler comes in, he's in almost every scene.
Yeah, because the thing that threw me off about that was when he accidentally kills the flowers from flipping the switches. They end up making it Stifler's conflict instead of Jim and Michelle's conflict. Because when we see Jim and Michelle, it's in montage form. And we see them walking around together. And it's like, oh, they're still in love even despite all these problems. But it's like, we're seeing them in montage form. And Stifler's getting full-on scenes for this conflict. It's like, you can tell where there's something off here, where we may be focused on the wrong thing, and the movie may have kind of lost its path a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there's still some funny stuff in it, but I think they try to push Stifler a little hard and a little more intense than he usually is.
Because they could have easily, like, you kind of watch the movie and you wonder, well, where would he have been and what could he have done? And it's like, if you cut down Stifler's screen time by at least 25%, you could have fit Oz into this.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like that's the reason Oz isn't in it, because they wanted to make more room for Stifler.
Well, I mean, in their defense, in 2003, with this cast, Sean William Scott would be the one you'd want to push.
Yeah. Well, it's also worth noting, we were talking about the year Mena Suvari was happening. This was, for the first movie, it was also the same year as Election for Chris Klein. So he was also kind of already in that raunchy movie vein at the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're both can be considered raunchy movies, but obviously Election and American Pie are much different in regards to their humor scale and where they're going with it, but still in that same vein. Because the reason I say that I actually feel Oz missing an American Wedding, which I imagine some people may not say. Like, a lot of people may not care that Oz is missing.
Yeah.
But his character, oftentimes, like, his character has, like, the biggest arc in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's supposed to be the Casanova type, which, interestingly enough, we hardly get that vibe. We only
It's almost like the She's All That vibe, kind of in reverse.
Yeah.
In a way.
And should I mention, one of the things I noticed, I don't know what this says about him or what I'm trying to say, but the first time we meet Oz, I feel like it says something about his character when it's him and Jim walking to school, and he's talking about, Jim's like so desperate, and he's like, because we saw him, trying to watch the Fuzzy Born and all that, and then when they're walking to school, he says, oh man, The Little Mermaid was on last night, and Ariel was just, oh my god. And Oz's response is, dude, she's a mermaid. It's like, shouldn't Oz's response be, dude, she's animated? Not the setback is not that she's a mermaid. But the thing about that is that Oz has the whole, Casanova thing going on. Despite the fact that we only really hear about this through word of mouth. We see it once with the college girl, and we see him, like, fail immediately.
Yeah.
So, like, already, we're, like, seeing his arc in, like, his first big scene.
Mm-hmm.
And we see him, like, change immediately when he gets laughed at. Mm-hmm. Because, here's the thing.
Kind of like what happened with Finch when the shitting scene happened.
I'll go even farther. The whole Stiffmeister thing. And the whole idea is that Stifler needs to grow up. Mm-hmm. And it's like, in Oz's first big scene of the first movie, his whole persona gets shut down immediately when he's laughed at. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen to Stifler until Reunion, when he says Stiffmeister and they laugh at him.
It actually happens. It happens in the gay bar in Wedding.
Yeah, when he's talking about when they introduce Bear. Because that's the thing about that, was when you talk about have the movies aged well, and it was like, does the gay bar scene age well? And it's like, in many ways, probably not, but the way they kind of work that a little bit is that they make the joke at Stifler's expense. They
come across as Stifler being ignorant.
Yeah. And then it's, but I mean, they still play that. Like, there's still some parts of the scene where it's like, I don't know. I don't know if that's...
You mean like when the dressmaker hits on Kevin?
Probably. But yeah, and the fact that it does feel like it'd be more appropriate if they, made Stifler the butt of the joke, and then when he gets laughed at again. But that's the thing also, is that Stifler kind of has to keep having the same arc, which they were smart enough to finally acknowledge in Reunion, when Reunion's basically the whole thing is Stifler needs to, like, grow up. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it took 4 movies to get there, but we got there. And then
but to be fair, when you look at the first movie and where you started with Stifler, he doesn't really feel like a character that's gonna stick around.
Yeah, even though he does get... what's interesting is that he gets a running joke throughout the movie, because you talk about his connection with the characters. Because the character he's the closest with is Oz.
Yeah.
And we do kind of see that throughout the first and second movie. But then there is the connection that he has with Finch, where the running joke is he's always uncomfortable around Finch because of the Stifler's mom thing. Mm-hmm. But it's like, I don't know. I feel like there's something missing here. I don't know exactly how you'd handle it entirely, but I mean, if Stifler was going to have any awkward interactions with another character, given the first big gross-out joke in the first movie, I feel like forever there should be some sort of trauma between him and Kevin. He and Kevin now know each other in a way they should never know after the first joke in the first movie. And their interactions never kind of have an awkwardness. And I feel like that should be... I mean, yeah, it's like just a one-off joke for gross out and all that. But I mean, like I said, when you look at the connections the characters have throughout the series, I feel like that should come back at least one more time. But, no. Are you looking for something?
Yeah, I just noticed on the cover, if you see, Thomasie and Nicholas is right here, but if you go to the inside, he's taken out.
That's weird.
Sorry, I got distracted.
Especially since he's such a crucial character.
I know, because I was looking for him because you were talking about him. Sorry, sidetrack, but interesting fact.
Well, yeah, but while we're on the subject, that is the thing about the connections between the characters, is I feel like that's something that 2 handled really well.
I really like 2.
Yeah, because the thing about it is, how would you say the first one is in regards to like authenticity of just that age and that group of friends?
I think there's a little bit to it, but I think it's also kind of blown out of proportion. But I mean, every school's different.
Well, I would say surely.
And I didn't really run with a crowd of those kind of guys, so I mean, it's hard to tell.
I would say with the kind of movie it is, there is intentional exaggeration, but it does really try to have those like really authentic moments, particularly when it gets to the end of prom, and it kind of gets like super serious, and like Kevin has to have his wake up call, and then they finally get where they're going. But I do like that they balance it, because you've got the more authentic stuff where we have what the Kevin and Vicky scene and the Oz and Heather scene, and then they balance that out with the exaggerated comedy with the Michelle sex scene.
Yeah. And what I like about these movies too is, do you notice whenever we are like ending a character's arc, I know it ends nicely.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the thing about 2 is the fact that I feel like they really show the strength of the friendship in a way that they don't as much in the series, when we have the scene where Kevin's out on the beach, whenever everything's just kind of getting ready to roll along, and like all 3 of them stop what they're doing to go see if Kevin's fine over the Vicky thing. And I feel like that's just a really kind of genuine moment between them, and it's this really kind of cool sort of triumph for them when we see them walking back to the party and everything's going to be fine again after he's done the whole... Because I feel like they get really... they handle it really nicely, the love story with Michelle also. Because there's the whole thing of like... we see the plot coming from a mile away, because it's the big cliche plot of he's building up to Nadia. So he's going to be taught by the geeky girl, but it's going to be the geeky girl he falls for, and Nadia's going to get shut out. Kindly, but still shut out. But the fact that they actually genuinely build he and Michelle's relationship, and the fact that we do actually feel like they like each other that much when that time comes. Because in another movie, that would have been so contrived, and it would have been so sudden, and it's like, I guess we're supposed to feel for them now. But they actually build it up enough, even through the raunchy gags, and actually get us there. And it feels genuine when we actually get there. And it's even to the point, I must admit, when they embrace and he says, "How's this for a band camp story?" That's really romantic for them. For them it is. So yeah, I really like the way 2 handles the relationships, probably more than any of the other movies, even though it's a big part of what makes Reunion work too, is that they work on that. But I feel like they never quite topped how well they handled it in the second one.
Yeah.
So,
who of the whole series, who's your favorite character?
I don't know what this means exactly. But I've had this thought many times, but I've never really thought to dissect it enough to figure out why. But for some reason, I feel like I relate most to Finch.
Really?
I don't know why, but yeah. What about you?
Honestly, this is going to take us in a new direction. One of my favorite parts of this whole series is Jim's dad.
I was waiting for that.
Jim's dad.
I was hoping that was the direction you were going.
He's just so genuine and so like fatherly. And in American Reunion, he you feel bad for him.
Yeah, he gets a whole subplot.
He does, and he deserves it.
And it's like they basically killed off Jim's mom for the sake of doing the Stifler's mom thing. But it gives him more to work with, because I love everything from pretty much everything from the first movie on. Like, he never hits a false note. And he's even he's like the one person that stuck around for the direct-to-video shit, which I still haven't watched any of those, so I wouldn't know.
I haven't either.
But the interactions even from the first movie are just so gold and fit his comedic style so well too. One of my, just those little moments too that you kind of catch after the fact, like when he he's knocking on. It's when Jim's looking through the stuff. It's like when he's playing with the condom that Kevin gave him, and Jim's dad is knocking on the door, and he's like, "Hold on, I'll be right there." And he's knocking for a long time, and Jim is saying, "I'll be right there," audibly. But when he finally answers the door, Jim's dad goes, "Oh, Jim, you're here." and he's got the bag of magazines, and he sits down. And he's clearly holding this bag of magazines right in front of him, and they have like a little conversation. And then the transition is, "Oh, I almost forgot." And then of course the classic, like the most memorable of Jim's dad's lines, I think, would be, "Oh, look at that picture. That was a great day, wasn't it? We had fun that day. Jim, I want to talk about masturbation." And the way he just slides in, and those transitions are just in there, are just like, you have to be somebody as comedically experienced as Eugene Levy to deliver those lines.
I don't know that, like you were talking about when you were talking about The Hustle and how much you hated it, and you talked about that Rebel Wilson scene where you said that Steve Martin could be the only one to make that line work.
Yeah.
I feel like Eugene Levy's one of the only people that could have pulled off Jim's dad.
Yeah, because I'm sure the other comedic actors could, particularly if they tried it with their own style. But I feel like if most actors tried to do the same role the way Eugene Levy did, it would scream, "Hey, I'm trying to be funny."
Yeah.
And he makes Jim's dad feel like such a real character, even despite
his delivery is gold every time. like what you love. Don't forget your penis cream from 2.
Yeah. It's like every time I'm trying to not forget something in my head, I hear Eugene Levy's voice say, "Don't forget your penis cream." And I also even the corny stuff, even when he's being like the cliche dorky dad. Mm-hmm. For some reason, every time it still gets me in the second one when he says, "Keep it real, homies." It's like only he could make that work without it being like it's trying too hard.
Yeah. And he's just such a genuine character. He's a character that could have easily been a throwaway character for like some big celebrity to bring in to be like the dorky dad, but he really owns it. Like
kind of like how I can't remember which movie it is. I want to say it's 2, where there's deleted scenes where Chris Penn plays Stifler's dad.
Yeah.
It would have been something like, I didn't watch those scenes, but it would have been like they're kind of trying to draw attention to the actor. Mm-hmm. But he just sort of fits in, so...
And, like, you see how Jim is, and you're like, and you see the interaction, you're like, yeah, I totally buy that dude as Jim's dad.
Yeah.
I 100% buy that.
Even despite, through all his stories, we hear how much more successful he was women-wise.
Yeah. Or is he just putting on a front?
I would say he's too earnest for that to be made up. because he's so like just sort of putting it out there, like when the shaving the pubes scene in Wedding, when he's like, "I never had that problem. Women never complain down there." And when he's talking to Michelle about have you ever done it like all day, and he's like, "Oh, I've done it from morning all the way through brunch." And it's
yeah,
and everything is so authentic when it comes out.
Yeah, and even when it changes characters and he's not giving it to Jim and he's giving it to her, it still feels like...
It makes you want to see him interact with the other characters.
It does.
Like, that's something that they wouldn't have been overdoing it if they did that.
Yeah, they kind of dove into it in Reunion a little bit because he hung out with Stifler a little bit.
Yeah. I love their interactions too. And that's another thing Eugene Levy really makes work, is Reunion goes into the whole thing about, the old person getting high, and that's a really played out thing that's not very funny anymore unless you do it right. So we've got the scenes where he and Stifler are like just talking, and he's just, being normal Jim's dad. And he's even says like, "Oh, Mr. Levinstein," and stuff like that. But then after Jim's dad talks for a little bit, Stifler just says, "I'm gonna get you fucked up."
and we want to see it. Like, when he says that, we're like, okay, let's take this ride.
Yeah, and then even when they're talking about, like, he says, "We're gonna get you vag," and he's like, "Oh, is that like short for vagina?" And then later when Jim tries to collect him, and he's like, "No, he's just getting me some vag." It's like, that stuff really should not work. Like, on paper, it should not work. But Eugene Levy can make it work. And that's what makes the character so golden. And then we were talking about...
Eugene Levy's been the highlight of quite a few things that I've seen him in.
Yeah. It was also nice to see the Christopher Guest reunion when they brought Fred Willard in for Wedding.
Yeah.
I just realized I wrote a line down here I forgot. I was going to mention when we talked about the relationship between Stifler and Oz. Mm-hmm. It's the scene we were talking about when Oz decides to leave the lacrosse game to go to the choir competition. And it's the way like, we actually see Stifler almost betrayed, like, when he just looks off and is like, Oz? Fuckface? And then we have the whole scene where he goes back to the choir, and then he makes up with Heather and all that. And then we just cut back to them in the exact same place. They haven't even moved, and Stifler just says, I don't think he's coming back. That's probably one problem I have with 1, and it's something that does kind of come up throughout the series sometimes, and that's the conflicts can get contrived. Like, one of the more contrived conflicts I feel like we had in the series was when Heather gets mad at Oz when she sees him on the field after they've talked, and she, like, asks him to prom and all that. And, like, Stifler's, like, making fun of her and making fun of him and all that, and Oz is just kind of standing there taking it, and then he, like, gives him a reluctant high five. You can tell Oz isn't into it, but she, like, holds that against him for, like, the entire middle of the movie so they can make up later. I feel like that's really contrived.
Yeah.
And then I think there was some... In American Reunion also, it's like... American Reunion is one of those ones that gets to the place where when we're basically reaching our comedic peak, like when we're getting, you know, Jim's dad getting all fucked up and all that. There's one where there's a joke that I love in Reunion because they use a throwaway line, and it's like you're like, huh, when you hear it, but then because usually when you say something as a joke and then you bring that joke back, it's like, oh yeah, they're trying to make a recurring gag or whatever. And sometimes it's not as funny the second time. But there's a joke that is so simple in American Reunion, and they bring it back, and it's like 20 times funnier than it was. And that was when they're on the beach, and they're saying, like, you know, hey, that's the guy that used to be Kara's babysitter. And they're like, which one? And he says, the guy that looks like Adam Sandler. And you're like, huh, Jason Biggs, Adam Sandler, I guess I can kind of see it. But then later on, when he catches the two of them in bed, much later... And he says, you're going down, Sandler! It's the funniest thing ever! And so we have that scene, and that's with the Jim's dad stuff and all that. And then just as we basically reach our comedic peak, like it's one of those cases where all the contrived conflicts happen at the same time, one after the other. And they all need resolved. And there's the weird thing where Finch gets arrested. Like, I don't know what the hell that is. I mean, I get the whole idea of him, like, you know, building up a life that he didn't actually live and all that. And he's kind of...
The base for that's kind of set in the first one. When he has Jessica lie to everyone about him.
And he's basically slowly becoming that, but he's becoming that in a certain extent, but not in, like, the cool way he tried to set up.
Yeah, which fits Finch, because he's always kind of... In every movie, he's kind of got this air of mystery.
Yeah. And did you notice that also there is, like, the sort of recurring, like, moments throughout the movies? Like, we talk about the Finch thing, but there's, like, they all have the opening scene where Jim gets humiliated. So we got the first scene with the sock, the second scene where he gets caught in his dorm with the girl. We're still trying to figure out how the hell Jim got a second girl in bed. Then there's the proposal.
I'm still trying to figure out how... Because that was that girl's room. Or was it Jim's room? Either way, a set of parents went to that room not knowing they should be there.
It was for the comedy. It was for the comedy.
It is funny, though. It's another Jim's dad moment where the guy walks in and he's so angry that his daughter's there naked with Jim, and Jim's dad's just trying to make pleasantries.
Like, I didn't get your daughter's name. Hopefully my son did. And then he gets
another gold delivery.
And then he gets caught by his own kid with his laptop.
Yeah.
In a reunion. And then you've got the recurring scene of something gross happening to Stifler. But this one has an arc. Because the gross out scene with Stifler in American Pie is drinking Kevin. The second one is getting pissed on by John Cho. And both times it's something that somebody does to him inadvertently. And then in Wedding, it's something that he inadvertently has to do to himself. And then finally in Reunion, it's him doing it to somebody else when he shits in the cooler. Yeah. I love that shot of him when he's just doing that clearly. And when Jim's asking him what he's doing, it's like, I'm taking a shit. And then there was another one also that's recurring that I forgot about. I don't remember now. Oh god, I just need to burn those. Oh yeah, a centerpiece scene involving a prolonged nude scene. You got the naughtiest scene, the lesbian scene, the bachelor party, getting Kara back to her room.
Oh yeah.
It's like they're all four of those are the centerpiece of the movie, pretty much. The center whole sort of almost. I struggle with saying. I struggle to say Marx Brothers like, but honestly.
And do you notice each one of them has like a different like conflict going on? Like in the first one, the big fallout is between Heather and Oz. In second one, I was going somewhere with this and I don't
Kevin
remember.
and Vicky, maybe?
Yeah, Kevin and Vicky in the second one. The third one is
It doesn't have to be a romantic one. You could say
like
Stifler,
and everyone. And then in Reunion, Jim and Michelle.
Which is appropriate because it all comes back to them.
Yeah.
It's like it's nice that the series remembers to do that to keep bringing it back to them. And then there's your phone again.
Yeah.
I just randomly wrote down a line here that I like. I wasn't sure what context I was going to put it in. It's the scene in 2 when something has just happened. It's when he finds out that Naughty is coming, I think, and he's not sure how he's going to prepare for it. So they're sitting outside the hot dog shop, and it just starts with Jim going shit. And the place is closed, so in response to the shit, Finch just says, "Don't worry, Jim. You can get hot dogs tomorrow." I have no context to bring that line up. I just like it. So what else is there? Another thing I wrote down was that I still do like some of the joke setups in Wedding. Like those things just kind of build on themselves, even if it does feel a bit more forced. I can never get enough of the physical gag with... when you talk about physical gags, we've really got to point out... It's easy to look at Jim and say, God, his life sucks. But we also do really have to stop and commend the commitment that Jason Biggs has to this role. And some of the physicality he's gone through for this role. I think about... like a classic comedy scene, especially in regards to physical comedy, would have to be when he super glues himself to himself. It's like a really great moment of physical comedy, and him trying to get through the door and all that. But for some reason, a gag that, once again, might seem really easy and contrived, but for some reason I just love it, is the dog in American Wedding at the beginning. When they walk in and he's licking Stifler and Jim's got him from behind, and somehow Jim's pants have fallen down. There's 2 different lines here that make it look even worse, where it's Jim's trying to explain by saying, "I'm trying to get him off," and then he's looking down at Stifler because Stifler got the cake all over himself, and he's saying, "Dude, take your pants off." All these situations that would only happen to Jim.
We talked about this before, I also like when they're there for the dinner, and his reaction to seeing Finch hiding in the cabinet.
Yes. Oh, there's another line from 2 I forgot that I love that Jim's dad says. We're all over the place now. When it's... it was 2, I think, wasn't it? When he says, "Hey, what do you think of Nadia?" And it's something like that. And Jim's dad's response is, "Why did she say something?" So, there is something, though, that I noticed about 3 that also kind of stands out. And this just may be, like... I guess you could say nitpicky, but for some reason, watching them close together is something I really noticed. Do you think Wedding kind of looks weird visually? Where, like, you've got 1, 2, and 4, but then 3 has, like, this really murky look to it for some reason.
Yeah.
Am I the only person that notices this? It's, like, really dark for some reason.
Yeah. It's like it's shot completely differently.
They did, I would say they changed directors, but I think they changed directors every time. Yeah, they changed directors every time. And Reunion was the only one where they changed the writer. The same writer wrote the first 3.
Yeah. Which
is interesting since Reunion feels like such a love letter to the whole series. You'd think it'd be the same guy, but it was 2 different writers. They wrote and directed it themselves.
Yeah, but sometimes other writers have an easier ability paying respect to someone else than they do to their own work.
Yeah, because sometimes
look how many writers and directors change throughout the MCU, but every movie feels like a love letter to the others.
Yeah, that's also because there was we had Kevin Feige basically overseeing the whole thing. But it was sometimes also where it seems like even when it was the same writer, the callbacks didn't really work. The one that really stands out to me is how he fixed the flowers in American Wedding. When he got the woman to come down by doing the "you don't score until you score" line. I've never understood how that worked. It's like it was just this contrivance to, like, oh, they brought back, a line we know from the first movie. problem solved.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, as long as we're acknowledging that's a line from the first movie, we're not thinking about the fact of, wait, what the hell does this mean to
I'm not gonna lie, until you just said it, I forgot that it was a line from the first movie.
Yeah, it was the lacrosse coach. So, yeah, but I mean, overall, there is still, like, something weirdly cohesive here. I'm trying to, even, another callback I really liked that was in Reunion was, when they're at the reunion and Oz and Heather are talking again, it's playing the song from the first movie that they're losing their virginity to. I thought that was a really nice touch. And it kind of a way how it makes them go full circle.
Yeah.
Like, if there's one thing that I think Reunion sometimes is really contrived about is, like, the way it sets up how we're definitely supposed to feel about some people. The way it builds up that Katrina Bowden's character is pretty unlikable, so we know that Oz and Heather will probably work out, and Drawn is a piece of shit, more or less, so we know it's just heading in that direction. There's one that doesn't really sit well with me, and that's Stifler's boss, because obviously he's a douchebag, but it's like the first time we see him being a douchebag, he's pretty much treating Stifler the way he probably should, because Stifler's just fucking off. In his office, and he's going around like slapping asses. He gave that guy a heart attack pretending to fire him, and it's like, is this guy is Stifler's boss really a douchebag? Because we're seeing it from Stifler's perspective. I don't know, because there are like 4 different moments in Reunion where Stifler should probably be in prison, and I think they even bring that up at one point. So it's like it's kind of hard to figure it out in that sense. But I mean, for the most part. I think Reunion works well as like kind of a constant callback that still somehow works without feeling like it's too forced. Just in some cases. And yeah, like I said, I think my favorite arc in the whole movie is the MILF guys. I even love the moment when Jim crashes the car, and that's John Cho's first scene in Reunion, and he just pulls up and screams, "You're okay!" And then the way Jim brings it up, where he's like they play on the joke that they're credited as MILF guy number 1 and MILF guy number 2 in every movie. And the way Jim actually says, where's other MILF guy? And I love how John Cho's famous for saying the line, and John Cho's like the most famous of the cast now, yet he's MILF guy number 2. And then it's like the best payoff in the series when they meet up again in the bleachers. I mean, it is a great payoff that they bring Finch's mom into the equation, and I love Finch's, like, he can sense the danger. But no, the fact that it brings those two back together is the most beautiful thing about that joke. So, yeah. And like I said, I think he's my favorite returning character too, because when he pops up in Wedding too, he's he basically says, "Oh, by the way, we're gonna be ushers," and it's like,
and they shit on the food.
Yeah. There is. I do also like the joke of what Oz became. Like what everybody became is kind of interesting to see. But Oz in particular, where he was like, he's semi-famous, but he lost a dancing competition to Gilbert Gottfried. And I love that they didn't get a Gilbert Gottfried cameo, but they did get Neil Patrick Harris to cameo as the host, which the John Cho connection feels like it had something to do with that.
Yeah, it might have.
There is one thing where it was like, we're talking about stuff that was dated, like looking back to 1999, and when I watched Reunion again, I couldn't help but like go, oh, at a moment in the first scene of Reunion, where it's, I mean, obviously we all kind of knew this kind of stuff about him, but I mean, especially with the developments now, it kind of stood out to me when Jim goes over to the radio and puts it on and says, "R. Kelly always does the trick." It's like, oh shit. That's the first thing we hear when Reunion starts. But no, apart from that, I do think, oh yeah, I also wrote down, there is something that I liked about Jim's dad also, that he brought to Reunion. And that is, you look at all these jokes and all that, and how, like we said, he just feels so earnest and genuine. And then there's the joke in Reunion when they're trying to, you know, kind of fix him up, give him a little makeover before he goes out. And so they do the thing where they're going to, like, trim his eyebrows, and there's, like, a whole bunch of hair, and then he turns to the mirror and he just looks the same. And he's like, whoa, this looks great. And it's like, with all the jokes in this movie, that's such an innocent joke. So yeah, so is that about it? Do you have anything else to say about any of them?
No, I just think, I find once in a while they're fun to go back and watch through. I mean, the way I revisited them was just I was browsing Netflix and the first 3 were on there, and
yeah, because for the kind of movies there are, for the kind of movies that they are, they probably shouldn't hold up as well as they do. Movies like this, the humor fades so fast because humor evolves so much. But there's something about these movies that, for the most part, is still really funny. Even if Wedding is probably the one that took the biggest hit with time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think what helps it is the characters.
Yeah.
The characters all feel unique.
Yeah.
And they're all, like, they're not the most likable guys in the world. I mean, the plot of the first movie is they want to get laid. But they're all relatable in some way.
Yeah, and human.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something you don't see in movies like this.
No, they could have easily all been Stiflers.
Borderline rapists, basically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
they all go about it different ways, Stifler just goes by numbers. The more women he gets in front of, the more of a chance he's got of getting laid. Finch kind of takes the being mysterious route. Oz kind of starts out deceptive, and then kind of warms up.
He goes from jock to sensitive.
Yeah. Kevin's already there. He's just trying to close the deal. He's the furthest along when we start.
Yeah.
And then Jim is just desperate.
Though I will say, talking of desperation, I do love Kevin's delivery of when they're in the classroom and Vicky's finally made her decision and she, says, I want to do it. Kevin says, now? That'll volume much louder than it should be. Yeah, and like I said, it's easy to see why the first one took off, because even though it is material and like a genre we've seen before, there's like just so many standout scenes about it that just go, like it goes from memorable scene to memorable scene throughout, where we've got the pale ale scene, we've got the he fucks the pie scene, we've got the naughtiest scene, we've got the scene where he goes down on Vicky with her parents in the other room, the opening scene, a shit scene that rivals Dumb and Dumber. It takes comedies like this to make the shit scene an art form. It's like, if anyone was going to do that, the Fairleys would do it, and if anything was going to try to recapture that, it would be a movie like this that made the impact that it did at the time that it came out.
Plus, I think going back and watching, especially the first one, it's one of those movies that you watch that's a high school movie that makes you kind of miss some of those things about high school. Because it's around, it focuses on the fun times in high school, like, They don't spend a lot of time in class or anything like that. It's a lot of the outside stuff and the fact that they're close together and could just hang out whenever. Oz has the part-time job that he does. They have the prom. They have the after-party prom. Like, it focuses on the fun stuff. Just like in the second one, they're in college, but it doesn't... They spend all of the first 5 minutes in college. After that, it's just about summer vacation.
And it's also... And I kind of feel nostalgic about the first one in a different way. And that's basically how I view raunchy movies. Because it's like, when this came out at the time it was, and I was the age that I was, and the build-up that it had, I remember when I saw it, it felt like I was watching something like something I was never supposed to see, and it was this sacred thing, and like every single frame of it felt like, take this all in. And now it's like we're so desensitized because they try to up the ante on raunchy movies like every year, and it rarely pays off anymore. And it's always just them kind of trying too hard.
It's kind of how horror movies have become essentially just, how can we be the goriest?
Yeah, it's like the same with horror and the same with comedies. Like those really good ones where they know how to do it are still in there, but they've been overrun by people who are trying too hard.
Yeah.
So is that it?
I would say so.
Alright, I mentioned I do want to try to put the John Hughes thing together. We still haven't decided what movies are going to be in it, but I figure we can pick and choose. And then other stuff. I know you want to do a video on The Office eventually. So usually when we do something, but you also said you were hoping to do something small relatively soon also, so we'll probably think of something.
Yeah.
And then keep things going. And then I'm also about to talk about another franchise shortly after this. I've been preparing. I started preparing last week, and then I got sidetracked. So that should be...
What's franchise?
I can probably just say it, couldn't I?
Mm.
It's the Psycho franchise. I was gonna do it for Mother's Day.
Mm-hmm.
That was gonna be a joke.
My bad.
But I got sidetracked, so it's gonna be like a week or two after Mother's Day. So yeah, and all the other stuff that you can expect, like regular reviews and all that. And Oscar videos will be coming in a few months, so that's already back. So yeah, that's what all this is. So unless you have nothing else to say, I think that's it.